Now, next year will mark 10 years since the global financial crisis, with some fearing little has been learnt amid concerns it could happen again. Now, Australia fared better than most, unlike the UK, where the economy there went deeply into recession.
Former UK Labor politician Ed Balls served in both government and opposition through the GFC and is in Australia and will speak at the National Press Club later today. And Ed Balls joins us now from Canberra. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Virginia.
Can we say that the world economy has recovered?
I think we can't say that. I think the global financial crisis was a huge event, and we're still dealing with the consequences. And we see that in the slow growth we've seen in Britain and Europe. As you said, Australia has done better on growth because of the leadership of the government 10 years ago to keep the economy growing. We see it in the political instability, which you see in Britain with our vote to leave the European Union, in America with the election of Donald Trump. I think most importantly, though, we see it in the stagnation of wages and the rise in inequality, which began before the financial crisis and is carried on afterwards. And that really drives those political reactions. So when Wayne Swan here in Australia and the Australia Institute said, we want to make sure that we learn the right lessons and make sure that Australia doesn't succumb to those kind of political lurches that we've seen in Britain and America, I was really pleased to help, because I think tackling that inequality and making sure the economy works for all people and not just the people on the highest incomes is really important for the future.
Yeah, and that's where much of your argument goes too when it comes to inequality. You say neoliberalism has failed. But with that ever-widening disparity now between the wealthy and the rest, does it follow that capitalism generally and its promises to everyone has failed as well?
Well, I think that simply saying, carry on as before, allow free markets to operate, get government out of the way, that hasn't worked. It's led, as you said, to slower growth, but also to that rising inequality and a sense amongst many people that the system is not working for them. But the alternative to say, let's reject the market economy, not work with business, not work with other countries to try and make global trade work. For Australia, that would be a disaster because you're so integrated into the Pacific economy. For Britain as well, to walk away from our trade with our European partners is terrible in terms of jobs and growth. So what we need is some government leadership. Governments in Australia, but also in Britain and America and around the world to say, let's make sure our economies grow more strongly. Let's put in place the policies to make sure that when the market economy works, it's not a free-for-all, but it works fairly for more people. And I have to say, if you want to tackle companies not paying their fair share of tax, climate change, if you want to make sure the trade works fairly, you can't do that by turning your face against the global economy. We've got to work together. It means more international cooperation, not less. And I think part of the challenge for Australia in the last 10 years is that you did the right things after the global crisis, and too many other countries turned away from the right path, the stimulus, the policies for growth. And I think we need to get back to the kind of international cooperation that Australia was part of 10 years ago.
Well, it's good of you to say, but at the same time, I guess, and this goes to your original point, that the long shadow of the GFC is probably what we're seeing play out here, isn't it? And maybe in a sense it's a period of time we need to go through, which is that inward-looking governments, nationalist governments, protectionist governments and the like, as you say, the Brexit vote, isn't that all part of the next phase, if you like, the backlash following on from the GFC and the lack of trust and faith in institutions and politicians?
Well, look, there's definitely a lack of trust. And if you look at the British referendum last year, the campaign to stay in Europe said, it's going fine, stick with it. And too many people in our country said, it's not working for me. And if that's the best you can do, we'll try another route. And but I do say that going it alone, cutting yourself off from the economy doesn't work. Now, here in Australia, you are seeing wages growing more slowly. You're seeing that rising inequality. And I think if you just allow that to carry on and say that there's nothing government can do, the danger is that the politics turns toxic. So tackling inequality is not only about making the economy fairer, it's also about making the economy work in a stronger and better way. We need to look at the skills of people. We need to work about whether companies are investing for the long term. We need to make sure the labour market works in a fair way. We need international cooperation to tackle companies who aren't paying their fair share of tax in the countries where they are located. Policies for growth, policies for fairness, and as you said, government saying, let's together rebuild trust that the global economy can work for everybody and not just a few.
Can I just ask you, before we let you go, Ed Balls, how you believe this Brexit strategy in this Brexit period will end up? What will relations and trade relations between Britain and the rest of Europe look like, do you think, by the end of this process?
Well, I fear this process is going to be very long and arduous and difficult. The government and the European Commission have set a 2-year time frame to get the negotiation done, but that's going to be very, very hard to do. It's so complex and difficult, and at the moment it feels as though our European partners and the British government are quite a long way away. Now, there had to be change. We didn't join the single currency. We need some more control on migration, as you have here in Australia, but to walk away from the single market and our customs union will make it harder to trade with countries like Australia and America and China, not easier. So at the moment, it feels as though the negotiation is going badly, and it's going to take a long time, and that could be very damaging for investment in Britain. And I'm sure it's causing concern for companies here in Australia. Now, it can be done, but it's going to require real leadership, and that's very difficult in Britain at the moment. The government's weak and is very challenged.
Ed Balls, a fascinating conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.